RFK just talked about a certain number of medical schools re-engaging with I think it was 35 or 40 hours of nutritional education in medical schools. Okay, great. But that has to translate to clinical. And so the conversation I had with somebody, they said, well, that teaching should be from licensed dietitians and nutritionists. And my point was, I said, look, yes, they have done a great job to this point, but you can see the problem we have at this point, where doctors have advocated their job of understanding the nutritional translation into the clinical application. And the only way you do that is not sit in a lecture and listen to somebody to dictate to you, but it's to actually engage. And the way you engage on this is you engage in clinical application.
Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now.
Cancer myth versus cancer truth. Welcome to the fourth part of a 7-part series, maybe one bonus, looking at these myths and truths of cancer, fact versus fiction. And this one is entitled Know Your Number, because knowing your number, or understanding fact versus fiction, myth versus truth, empowers you, the individual, for better prevention, better early detection, treatment, and even healing decisions that impacts you and your family, loved ones. So this is the fourth part of a 7-part series. The first part I encourage you to check out in previous recordings: war, the systemic fallacy, and presence does not equal function. So this is Know Your Number. What is a number? So we talk a lot about health measurements, health metrics, but these quantitative values, do they really represent actual context and the quality of evidence supporting them in the functional interplay of complexity within the body? And what happens in medicine is we get enamored with the shiny toy. We get enamored with the numbers, but we lose track of the context of what's behind the numbers, the individual, the humanity. So this brings me of mind to a quote. Get this. Numbers do not feel, do not bleed or weep or hope. They do not know bravery or sacrifice, love and allegiance. At the very apex of callousness, you will find only ones and zeros. Medicine struggles with ones and zeros. We, again, get enamored with technology, with the shiny object, the fancy new device, the new drug, and we lose track of what we're looking at in those ones and zeros, those numbers, those labs, those imaging, is the humanity of the woman behind it, the man behind it, the father, the mother, the sister, the brother, the friend, the neighbor that's behind those numbers. Because we treat the humanity. Yes, we use the numbers to treat the humanity, but we don't treat the numbers. See, what we're dealing with here is the quantitative metrics not really representing the holistic context or picture. And it's because in medicine we have a problem with reductionism, compartmentalization to understand these complex issues, but we don't reassemble them to the benefit of the whole. And we have to understand that within the confines of the tumor microenvironment, particularly the immune system that we're talking about here, it's a very intricate, dynamic interplay, dance, if you will. And trust me, my wife loves to dance. I guess I like to dance, I just don't dance because I'm not good at it. But by deconstructing these health metrics, we can move beyond the raw count, the raw number, and embrace actually what the science is showing. The context, the functional, the spatial relationships, and the dynamic relationship and interplay of all these different variables that go into the immune response to generate an anti-tumor immune response. So we got to look beyond the number. Reminds me back in the 2010s when there was a huge marketing campaign in terms of what's your number. And there was on billboards everywhere. Of course, here was talking about testosterone, as if you can minimize what the metabolic impacts of for a man down to a number of testosterone. And that is a perfect example of reductionistic fallacy, which is reducing something to the point of it does not even simply hang out in the truth. Know your number. Again, zeros and ones. Same problem. But here we have the same problem as it relates to deconstructing the health metrics relating to know your number, not here testosterone, but lymphocytes. Because I've seen people online wearing shirts that say, know your lymphocyte number, know your lymphocyte count. Though we look at lymphocyte count, what's the context of those? And is that merely getting caught up in the zeros and ones and losing sight of the reality of the context within the tumor microenvironment and anti-tumor immune competence? And are we losing sight of the humanity that we're actually treating? See, when we look at these slogans, they're really just marketing. It's catchy slogans. It's a single value focus. It's simplistic to understand, but it's taken out of context of the reality of the situation. But marketing is not intended to present truth. It's presented and intended to influence. And so if you can simplify a very complex issue into a market manipulated tool, then you can do that quite easily and say, hey, testosterone, you're just a number, so raise it and you're going to be great. Lymphocytes, your levels are low, just raise them and you're going to be great in terms of fighting cancer. But the scientific reality here is that this is a complex system. We'll get into it in just a second. And the evidence will all be there supporting it, so check out the show notes. And there's individual heterogeneity. We're all different. All tumor types are different. And within the tumor, there's differences. And we'll talk about each one of those. So periphery versus the tumor microenvironment, the fallacy of the number here becomes quite evident. See, in the periphery, when we check it, it's a static number. It's not that it's static all the time, but that fixed number, that 1 and 0, at that moment is fixed. What's the context of it? In the systemic circulation, does that translate to intratumorally? What does that actually translate to systemic inventory? Because that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing a static number in systemic inventory at that moment in time. No context of spatial relationship, which you'll see is quite important. Now, the tumor microenvironment, it's very dynamic, and I would say the systemic is as well, but the tumor is much more of an unknown, but we're beginning to know. It's a dynamic process. It's localized, functional, relational. Tumor immune competence, this is a term I want you to become familiar with. It's the capacity of the immune system within the tumor microenvironment to execute effective, sustained anti-tumor immunity, resulting in tumor control and eradication. Is that not the goal? It's not defined by immune cell presence alone, nor by peripheral count, but by local functional capacity and capability within the context and relationship and spatial organization with other immune cells within the tumor microenvironment. Peripheral immune counts don't reflect immune infiltration. We could have great immune peripheral counts of lymphocytes, natural killer cells, yet be completely depleted within the tumor microenvironment. See, the systemic immune status does nothing or says nothing about the effect of anti-tumor microenvironment immune status. Because tumors actively prevent immune cell extravasation or infiltration or trafficking, into the tumor microenvironment. And it does this through a variety of ways, barriers. These can be stromal fibrous, dense barriers. These can be immunologic barriers. These can be metabolic barriers. These can be acid-base barriers. There's a variety of barriers that keep the immune system out, even keeping the immune system or recruiting the immune system in that then rebuffs the immune system, autoimmune-esque in a way. They can retain immune cells in the peripheral circulation, keeping them from, again, extravasating. So there can be an issue where the immune system doesn't even recognize, but here the immune system can recognize, but it's kept out. It's kept at the periphery. So it's not just impairing the trafficking, it's keeping it out. Tumors can also suppress immune cell activation locally. And here's where it really likes to use the immune system, recruit certain immune cells and immune signaling that is a result of that, then suppresses the immune system and keeps it out. There's also shifting of macrophage polarization, neutrophil polarization. And so the environment here, in a way, is dictating the immune response, and the tumor is in turn dictating or reprogramming the environment that is then dictating a reprogrammed immune environment that protects the cancer. The tumors can also alter signaling, chemokines, cytokines. These are signals that are communications within the immune system that can basically provide an immunosuppressive immune balance signaling versus anti-tumor. So the signaling that is dictating the immune response, the immune cells in the intratumoral space, is dictated by the balance of a anti-tumor versus pro-tumor communication. This involves cytokines and chemokines. I was at a conference and I was sitting on stage on a panel recently. And understand, when I do these podcasts, when I do the blog posts, when I do reels, I always lead with the evidence because I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the science. In integrative oncology, we follow the science. As physicians, yes, we are scientists, and yes, we are clinicians. As a clinician, we practice based on the science. We can't separate those two. There's not scientists and clinician. If we have that designation, that compartmentalization, we have the problem we have today. Reminds me of an X post I was engaging with yesterday, where RFK just talked about a certain number of medical schools re-engaging with, like, I think it was like 35 or 40 hours of nutritional education in medical schools. Okay, great. But that has to translate to clinical. And so the conversation I had with somebody, they said, well, that teaching should be from licensed dietitians and nutritionists. And my point was, I said, look, yes, they have done a great job to this point, but you can see the problem we have at this point, where doctors have advocated their job of understanding the nutritional translation into the clinical application. And the only way you do that is not sit in a lecture and listen to somebody to dictate to you, but it's to actually engage. And the way you engage on this is you engage in clinical application. So a doctor getting up there and saying, here's how this nutritional strategy works. So when we talk about immunotherapy and fiber, you say, okay, here's how we incorporate a fiber-rich diet that this dietitian, this nutritionist is recommending, but here's what the science shows. See, what it's doing is it's taking a textbook lecture and it's making it reality. Didactics of medical education has long missed this concept. And integrative oncology, I believe we can step in to fill that void. But while I was on stage, there was a statement made that really shocked me because, again, this is very evidence-based in research. I encourage you to check out the show notes and all of it's there. And don't take my word for the studies, read them yourself. The statement was that the tumor immune microenvironment, the classifications, the immune desert, the immune excluded, and the inflamed, they are false. That's right, F-A-L-S-E. So I was a little bit taken aback by that. So let's dive into that conversation about what the evidence shows. What's that tumor immune microenvironment within the tumor microenvironment framework? Again, immune desert, immune excluded, and inflamed. Well, this tumor immune microenvironment, these components here that I just mentioned, they're widely used and validated in tumor immunology, spatial biology, and immunotherapy research. These are not theories or speculative concepts. At this current point in time, they're scientific reality. They're rooted in evidence, histopathological, immunohistochemistry, spatial transcriptomics, and even observed clinical immunotherapy response patterns in tissue, in people. The challenge isn't their existence, it's that we don't oversimplify into compartmentalization and break it down into reductionist fallacy. So let's define what is a tumor-competent environment or microenvironment. Well, it's one that's effective, it's sustained, and creates an anti-tumor immune response systemically. That's what we want. And that's what we work for at the Williams Cancer Institute. And it involves several points here. Obviously, tumor access or infiltration is critical. The immune cells have to get in. The immune cells kept out is one of the ways that the tumor protects itself from the immune system. The immune system has to recognize, it has to specifically recognize the tumor. And this is where you get major histocompatibility, type 1 and dendritic cells involved for antigen presentation. We have to have effector functional capacity, such as T cells. And this requires those dendritic cells traveling to the lymph nodes to then engage with lymphocytes, both being in the need for mature to actually activate the immune system. There must be resistance to local immune suppression within that tumor microenvironment. Again, that's one of the barriers, such as tumor-associated macrophages, type 2, neutrophils, type 2, myeloid-derived suppressing cells, T-regulating cells, signaling such as transforming growth factor beta, interleukin 10, interleukin 6, etc. All of these, plus hypoxia, acidity, adenosine, all of these help to create an environment that's immunosuppressive. And this also impacts spatial immune organization. And we've talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it here again. I think one of the most important facts moving forward in terms of understanding tumors is spatial relationships, triads, tertiary lymphoid structures. How do these immune cells relate to each other? Because the numbers can be there, but if they're not in relationship to each other proper to contextually signal the immune system, nothing happens. Nothing happens. You can have 11 football players on the field. You can throw the football down the right hash, and the wide receiver is running down the left hash. Spatial relationship ends up in an incompletion. But throw it on the left hash where the wide receiver is running, bingo, touchdown, win the game. Sorry about the metaphor there with football. And then all of this creates the dynamic opportunity for an anti-tumor immune response, anti-tumor immune competence, because that's what we're after. What is tumor immune competence not? Well, it's not a peripheral lymphocyte number. It's not a peripheral natural killer cell, dendritic cell number. It's not immune cell presence without the context of function. It's not systemic cytokine levels, though sometimes that's all we got to go on, so we have to extrapolate that into the tumor, and we have to understand the limitations of that as well as the numbers. It's not immune activation outside of the tumor. If they're activated outside the tumor, they can't get in, then there's no activity. And if they can't get in, there's no activation. And it's not predicted by biomarkers in the blood alone. So again, tumor immune competence is the functional, spatial, metabolic ability of intratumoral immune cells to access cancer cells, recognize tumor antigens, resist local immune suppression, and execute effective cytotoxic immunity locally and systemically. That is effective tumor immune competence, and that is what we're after. So let's look at classifying of these different tumor immunophenotypes. First is the inflamed. This is where the immune system gets in, okay, but it's dysfunctional. The immune presence, yes. Tumor access, yes. Function, impaired. Tumor immune competence, yes. Versus immune excluded, tumor immune microenvironment, the immune presence, yes, it's there. The tumor access, no, it's kept out. The function, minimal. Tumor immune competence, very, very low. Versus immune desert, this is the worst situation. There's no immune presence, there's no tumor access, the immune system doesn't even know it's there. The function is completely absent, and there's no tumor immune competence. So let's break these down each one by one. The worst is the immune desert. This is where the immune system is not primed, it doesn't even know the threat's there. Hard to believe, but that's true. This represents about 20 to 25% of tumors. The key characteristics here are very low T infiltration within the tumor parenchyma. Poor, and really none, poor or absent, completely absent antigen presentation. There's no dendritic cell priming or activation, and it has very low tumor mutational burden. Typically, it's associated with that. Versus the underlying mechanisms being defective antigen presentation, absence of chemokine or cytokine signaling that favors an anti-tumor. In fact, here it favors a pro-tumor, and frank immune ignorance. But it's created by the tumor. Okay, the tumor is doing this. Commonly associated tumors here are pancreatic adenocarcinoma, prostate cancer, certain types of colorectal cancer, and glioblastomas. But I said often associated with low tumor mutational burden. Flip that, it's actually high tumor mutational burden. The clinical implication here is generally immunotherapy that's not effective. It's ineffective because the immune system's not aware. The defenses are down and the tumor is left to progress unimpeded. Versus immune excluded is about 50 to 75% of tumors per the evidence. This is where the immune system sees the tumor, but it's kept out. So it's not that it knows it's there, it's primed, but it can't get in. This is where the barriers come in. And this is where exclusion zones have been discovered. These are those barriers, of dense stromal barriers, such as cancer-associated fibroblasts, the extracellular matrix, it's very dense, the abnormal vasculature or blood vessels that don't allow good blood flow in, which is why hyperthermia is a good therapy and a good immunotherapy, because it improves blood flow. It improves immune system delivery as well as therapeutic delivery. And then transforming growth factor beta signaling suppressive. So the therapeutic implications here is to target TGF-beta or transforming growth factor beta inhibition, remodel the stroma, break it up, and maintain normal vascularity to a degree. And this is where the ablative techniques and ablative therapies come in, because recent research, 2025 article, which that'll probably be the bonus podcast here, is that PEF, or biphasic nanosecond pulsed electric field therapy, is superior to irreversible electroporation, which is a older version of PEF, because the PEF maintains the vascularity. It maintains the ability of the immune system to migrate through the vascularity into the tumor, yet it breaks up the dense stromal tissue of the extracellular matrix in the stroma of the tumor microenvironment to open the scaffolding to allow the immune system to infiltrate. But it does this without damaging the surrounding healthy tissue, whereas IRE does the opposite of all three. This is why we choose to do the biphasic nanopulsed electric field therapy. Now, the inflamed or the hot tumor, because when we look at the immune desert, immune excluded, the immune desert would be the cold, the immune excluded would be the not cold but not hot either, and then the inflamed is hot tumor. And we get excited about inflamed because that means the immune system there, it's hot, the immune system's active. Yes, and then not yes. See, the key characteristics here is there is T cell infiltration, extravasation into the tumor parenchyma. There's high interferon gamma, which I get pumped about when I see on cytokine panels. But again, that's the periphery. How does that translate into the tumor microenvironment? We don't know, but at the moment, and coupled with imaging, it's the best we got. This signals an anti-tumor immune environment. When I see interferon gamma elevated, I know that there's immune engagement. PD-L1 expression in these tumor cells, immune cells. And then there's a presence of functional antigen presentation. So what we have here is we have immune engagement against the tumor, which is what we're after. Examples here would be melanoma, microsatellite instability, types of high colorectal cancer. It's going to be microsatellite instability, high colorectal cancers, and certain types of non-small cell lung cancer. So the clinical implication here is that the immune system is aware, the immune system has infiltrated, or what's also called extravasated, into the tumor, but it's dysfunctional, it's impaired, it's reduced, it's inhibited. So what we have to do here is overcome that. We have to give it a boost. But that's all great when we're talking about tissue, right? We want to move beyond just categories and zeros and ones. And we want to focus on clinical application. This is why taking science to clinical application is so important. Nutrition, immunotherapy, got to get to the application. What about immunotherapy response? Well, when we look at inflamed tumors, which from a tumor immune microenvironment it's the environment that we're trying to create, this shows superior response to conventional immune checkpoint inhibiting therapies. I want to pause here just a moment because when we talk about immunotherapy, conventional medicine has kind of hijacked that word just a little bit and said it's just immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy. These are like Keytruda, Opdivo. These are targeting these immune checkpoints that are upregulated to impair, immune function. It's a part of the T cell, B cell exhaustion, particularly T cell. But we have to understand that anything that's stimulating the immune system to an anti-tumor presence or activity or balance, that's immunotherapy. Fasting, immunotherapy. Good sleep, immunotherapy. High-dose melatonin, immunotherapy. 25, 50 grams IV vitamin C twice a week, immunotherapy. Fecal transplant, immunotherapy. So I think you get the point there. But looking at immunotherapy response clinically, okay, an inflamed tumor, you have higher objective response rates. You have improved progression-free survival and overall survival. I mean, that's why we do this. And it's correlated with higher tumor neoantigen load, immune activation. But this is also not just clinically translated, but it's translated visually via spatial biology. See, direct high-resolution visualization of these distinct tumor microenvironments are known, are seen. They've confirmed T cell exclusion zones in the immune-excluded tumors. They've seen and been able to quantify T cell absence in immune desert phenotypes of the tumor immune microenvironment. And they can map in detail the immune cell interactions within the inflamed tumors. See, it's not just one that translates clinically, it's one that translates visually via spatial biology. So it's not false, it's science. And again, we don't want to fall trap to reductionist fallacy, which is taking a complex issue, breaking it down into compartments, oversimplifying it, yes, to help us understand, but we have to understand the complex interplay and reconstitute it back to the whole environment in which it actually exists. And in ignoring that and keeping things compartmentalized, we can move right in from oversimplification to the loss of the synergy, the loss of the interplay, the loss of the complex relationship, and unfortunately, mislead our understanding of what's actually happening and mislead those we're actually trying to help and mislead those we're teaching other doctors or patients. And that's what's called reductionistic fallacy. We got to resynthesize them back to the whole in the context in which they actually exist, that dynamic contextual interplay. But we also have to understand that these tumor immune microenvironments are not static either. So we could just say, oh, this is what we get. They're all static. No, we have to keep breaking down each wall, critically think every time. No more groupthink. We've had enough of that. See, the immune desert can pivot to an immune excluded. The immune excluded can pivot to an inflamed, and an inflamed immune environment can be pushed to exhausted. So there can be fluidity in these immune environments. Don't let the complexity here overwhelm you. We have to understand the complexity is what it is and then say, okay, now let's work this problem. This is a continually evolving landscape within the tumor microenvironment and within the regions within the tumor microenvironment, because every tumor is heterogeneous. And intuitively, we should know this. I mean, my wife is 5'2", I'm 6'1". Used to be and a half, but now 6'1". She's a woman, I'm a man. We're heterogeneous. We see this, and our kids are the same. And just as I know you probably are aware of that in your family, in your life as well. But when we go to cancer treatment, everybody gets treated the same. And intuitively, we know this is wrong. And yet medicine doesn't see anything wrong with it. Well, guess what? The tumor microenvironment, the intratumoral immune environment, they're heterogeneous as well. See, within the same tumor, you're going to have immune excluded, immune desert, and maybe even immune inflamed locations. It's not just all one category or the other. And these are spatially arranged. See, when we target a tumor intratumorally, it's not just blindly placing a needle in any aspect of the tumor. We want to engage the tumor in the most metabolically active, most hypoxic area. And there's research that correlates the most FDG avid on a PET CT scan to the most hypoxic areas. Moderate correlation, definitely, not high, but it's what we've got to go on. And so we can work to pivot an immune desert to immune excluded, or an immune excluded to inflamed, or make an inflamed much hotter and pivot it from a dysfunctional anti-tumor to definitely anti-tumor. And all of this has treatment implications because of these spatially related and contextually organized environments. It allows whether we can have immunotherapy within the tumor immune microenvironment effective or not effective. See, this tumor spatial biology or heterogeneity is seen. And it's not just that it's one or the other, as I said, all or none. That's just not correct. But there's a hybrid model here where these coexist. So looking at hepatocellular carcinoma, it shows features of both immune excluded and inflamed tumors. So it's got these contextual spaces that are different immunologically within the tumor microenvironment. Glioblastoma, immune desert phenotype, and in the presence of immune excluded and immunosuppressive cells. So again, a hybrid environment. Pancreatic cancer, very dense desmoplastic stroma, keeping the immune system out, physical barrier, immune barrier. Mostly immune excluded, but some immune desert. So we have to understand the fluidity, not let it get us down, discouraged, but say, okay, it's a fluid. Now, how do we target this fluidity nature to our advantage? So we must focus on the hybrid immune status of these tumors. See, because when we look at going back to the periphery, know your number, when a person's diagnosed with cancer, they've not undergone treatment, the number in the periphery, the systemic, and the number in the tumor are decoupled. And this is because of tumor-driven exclusion mechanisms, the immunosuppressive cells, transforming growth factor beta, interleukin-10, the vascularity that's associated with tumor that basically doesn't allow it to get in, the dense stroma, as I mentioned, the chemokine-cytokine balance. And that's irrespective of systemic lymphocyte number or availability. It keeps it out. Now, immune excluded, immune desert, the lymphocyte count in the periphery remains within the normal cells, but it doesn't recognize or can't get in. See, again, when a tumor is not treated, when a cancer is not treated, there's no synergy, there's no relationship between what's in the periphery and what's in the tumor. Now, here's what's interesting. When you treat with chemotherapy and radiation, particularly radiation worse than chemotherapy, so chemoradiation, you actually start to get correlation. Yet, what do both of those do? They wage war on the immune system. They suppress the immune system. So where the correlation happens is when you destroy the immune system, peripherally and locally, if the immune system existed there at all. So the correlation there, I think clinically, doesn't translate well at all. The immune context within the tumor microenvironment, it's dictated by local regulatory factors, cellular interaction, spatial relationships, not simply a circulating number. Complex, yes, but that's what the science shows. Why the discordance? Why the difference between systemic and intratumoral? Well, vascular barriers. It's all about these barriers. The lymphocytes can't get in because of the tortuous nature of it. That's why, again, like things like hyperthermia improves that. Chemokine mismatch, cytokine mismatch. We got a balance here that's pro-tumor, anti-tumor. It keeps the anti-tumor immune cells out. The stromal portion of the tumor is very thick and fibrous, and that scaffolding keeps the immune system out. This is stromal strapping, as it's called. You'll find this in the extracellular matrix density. The metabolic hostility of that environment keeps immune cells out. And understand that metabolic hostility translates to acid-base barriers and immune barriers. And of course, checkpoint immune exhaustion. All of these are ways that we have this discordance between what's in the periphery and what's in the blood. We can have normal lymphocytes in the blood, yet they don't see the tumor and they can't penetrate the tumor. And what I just presented are 5 mechanisms by which that difference, that discordance exists. The bottom line, it's about location. It's about spatial relationship. It's about function. As I mentioned, the chemoradiation, when it destroys the immune system, that's where the correlation between the periphery and the tumor are actually more in alignment. But it's because the immune limitation in the tumor is met and matched by immune suppression because of the treatment. What's crucial is that when we look at cancer, and we particularly look at immune failure, it is immune mislocalization, immune improper spatial relationship, and this results in exclusion, dysfunction of immune cells within the tumor microenvironment. False? No. Plenty of science, going back really over a decade now. 2014, 2015, so check out 2018, 19, 20, 24. All the studies will be here supporting this discussion, be in the show notes, and please check that out and read them for yourself. So let's talk about something that's in the news. Interleukin 15. Dr. Shun is doing some great work. Super excited about another tool that this provides for us. But again, what happens and what I'm seeing is everybody's moving towards the magic bullet. Yeah, magic bullet failed with Paul Ehrlich back in the 1900s, and it doesn't apply now. We see that with chemotherapy. We see that with radiation. We see it with systemic immunotherapy. We see it with radiation. Whether it's one cause or one treatment, which that was the original Paul Ehrlich theory, using one chemical as one therapy to treat one disease. That's where chemotherapy came from. It had nothing to do with cancer. And that was only adopted in the 50s and 60s, using chemicals as a therapy to treat a disease. But it doesn't work. And we can't fall trapped to that same problem here with interleukin 15. Now, that being said, we're fans of it. But its efficacy cannot be inferred from peripheral lymphocyte numbers. And I've seen a lot of that. So I want to speak to this in the news, not to quote unquote attack interleukin 15, but as the example because a lot of people are talking about it. This highlights the discrepancy between peripheral and tumoral values. See, the peripheral counts, they don't contextually relate to the tumor immune microenvironment. They don't reflect the intratumoral immune cells, the activation, the dendritic cell priming, the T cell activation, the systemic activation. They don't show any of that. Yes, interleukin 15 activate natural killer cells and T cells. That's why they're so great. They work really well, I believe, in what's called that inflamed tumor. It helps to give that boost where the immune system is actually infiltrated. But when you have a tumor excluded or immune desert, that interleukin 15 activated T cells and natural killer cells, are they going to get in there? No, they're not, unless they're coupled with other techniques to actually open the door and allow them to enter. And again, pivot from an immune desert to immune excluded to inflame and not allow exhaustion. See, there's these physical stromal barriers that we have to break up. And these prevent a lot of the immune access. These restrict the ability, not just of the interleukin 15, but also the cytokine, but also the cells that they activate to penetrate into that tumor. Now, in a healthy cell, healthy environment, the immune cells destroy and target cells. But in the cancer or diseased environment, what we have is all these barriers, a wide variety of barriers, as I've mentioned, many, that basically trap or keep out the immune system and allows a tumor to grow unimpeded. And again, it also recruit the immune system to impair the immune system. So again, this gets quite complex. And I think it's also important to understand that this creates an immune privileged environment. This is why liver metastasis, I think, is so important. The gut immune liver environment is so important, I think, in basically working to prevent liver metastasis. But when you look at the liver is a very immunoprivileged environment, immunosuppressive. Why? Well, what we eat. Just about everything we eat goes through the port of circulation to the liver. So we can't have our immune system reacting to everything that we eat, even though maybe that's a way to keep out all the junk we're eating. Problem is we don't eat much food these days. We need to get back to that simple process of eating real food. But here, the environment within the liver, with the Kupffer cells, which are types of macrophages, etc., they're very immunoprivileged, meaning the immune system is in a way suppressed. So this is why the liver is such a rich environment for cancer to spread to. It's by its nature immunosuppressive. And then when a tumor gets locked in there, then obviously it takes advantage of that situation. There's also a new concept I want to get you introduced to, what's called cytokine sink, which impairs receptor efficacy and signaling efficacy. So what we have here is where the signaling, like interleukin-15, which is a cytokine, or chemokines, all of these signaling are working to activate and recruit and move immune cells, right? And again, think of that football team. They got to be on the same page. But here, what's important is that these signaling, they're locked up, they're intercepted. They're not allowed to reach and activate and direct the CD8 cells, natural killer cells, or memory T cells. And part of that is because of the immunosuppressive cells. Tumor-associated macrophages, type 2, tumor-associated neutrophils, type 2, neutrophil extracellular traps, myeloid-derived suppressing cells. They'll actually bind to the interleukin-15 and lock it up. So this natural killer cell or the T cell never has the ability to interact with it. Or dendritic cells are dysfunctional or not mature, and they can't respond to interleukin-15. So you can see we don't want to oversimplify it right into fallacy. See, there's these suppressive signals that it's not just, we just give interleukin-15 and everything's fine. We give lymphocytes, everything's fine. Natural killer cells, everything's fine. Dendritic cells, and everything's fine. That is a nuanced or quote unquote modern day view of the magic bullet theory. It, for lack of a better English vernacular, it don't work. Transforming growth factor beta, interleukin-10, vascular endothelial growth factor, prostaglandin E2. These are immunosuppressive signaling, cytokines, or signals that actually counter the interleukin-15. And these will negatively impact natural killer cell cytotoxicity, CD8 cytotoxic T cell cytotoxicity, and dendritic cell maturation. So thus here we can't have dendritic cells engage with the tumor antigens within the tumor. We can't get activation of dendritic cells. There's no maturation, there's no antigen presentation, there's no T cell, no natural killer cell activation. Particularly here, transforming growth factor beta is particularly potent. The abnormal vasculature, the vascularity that is typically very tortuous and not functional in the tumor is, of course, a byproduct of hypoxia, but here it aids the tumor. It restricts the immune trafficking. It reduces the immune system to be able to access the tumor. It's very tortuous, very disorganized. It's very leaky and permeable, and it leads to hypoxia. In part, is driven by hypoxia. And in part, it's driven by this high metabolic demand, this high growth factor of the tumor replicating, and the vascularity can't keep up with it. But it's the hypoxia with hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha that's driving it, but also it contributes to the hypoxia. So it's really a vicious cycle circling the drain. And so what happens here is we have impaired immune trafficking, dendritic cells, T cells, natural killer cells. And we have poor distribution of cytokines, chemokines to impair the distribution of those immune cells. And all of that leads to poor delivery of immune cells to create an anti-tumor immune environment. So it creates a pro-tumor immune rebuffing environment, if you will. Now, vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF, is really important here, and we follow that as a part of a lab, but it drives vascular disorganization. It's not just a consequence of the rapid tumor growth. As I said, it's a vicious cycle, but it contributes to the immune exclusion because of the tortuous nature and the hypoxia. So again, they feed each other. And this is why, again, PEF over IRE as an intratumoral ablation, because it preserves better that conduit vascularity into the tumor. So there's this metabolic suppression of cytokine signaling. So we can give interleukin-15, yet there's counters to it. The cells may not react to it. When we look at interleukin-15, we have to recognize that there have to be receptors on the dendritic cells to respond. Those dendritic cells have to be mature. They have to be in the presence of the tumor antigens within the parenchyma with the major histocompatibility complex 1 to present it. The T effector cells have to be there. They have to be primed. Natural killer cells, the same. But if we have hypoxia, we have lactate accumulation, which honestly, when you look at the Warburg effect, which is that aerobic glycolysis where the cancer is making energy very inefficiently, and it does that in part because of the high replicative demand, because of the replicative immortality hallmark of cancer, but it has to sacrifice efficiency for speed. Part of that's also because of the oxidative stress. Cancer can't handle oxidative stress very well at all. And so the going through the glycolysis to Krebs cycle electron transport chain, it actually creates more oxidative stress, and the cancer can't handle that. So it shifts metabolically in the presence of oxygen to glycolysis, which typically dominated in anaerobic environments. But the production of lactate, here the tumor goes, yes, we can use this, but it dumps it outside of the tumor into that environment, and that creates a rebuffing environment, an acid-base environment driven by lactate. Adenosine, a potent immunosuppressive metabolite, and then indolamine 2,3 dioxygenase pathway, which is in process of disordered tryptophan metabolism, but here it's going to impair T cell function because tryptophan is important in T cell function. Now, the consequence here is impaired natural killer cell proliferation, activation, cytotoxic CD8 T cell proliferation, activation, and we're just not going to get that interleukin-15 activation of the immune cells in an anti-tumor way because the tumor's keeping it out, again, in a wide variety of ways. So here's a key principle. Why, again, not to pick on interleukin-15, but because it's in the news, why circulating counts, lymphocyte counts here, are poor proxy for interleukin-15 efficacy. The key principle here is that functional tumor immune competence is dictated by localization, spatial relationship, cell interaction, signaling context. It's not just about a number in the periphery. So what are predictors of interleukin-15 efficacy? Because it is a therapy, again, that we're fans of. Dr. Schoen and his work is excellent and outstanding. But its prediction is, I think the predictors of its success are confined. It's based on reversible exhaustion. There's exhaustion that's not reversible, but the exhaustion is reversible. That within the tumor immune microenvironment, there's interleukin-2 and there's interleukin-15 receptor and natural killer cells and CD8 T cells. Well, that kind of takes immune excluded and immune desert out, which is at least 75%, at least where we currently recognize now. That's why my take is that interleukin-15 works really well in the inflamed tumors. It's giving it that boost. That, in the periphery, there are CD8 circulating T cells and they infiltrate the tumor immune microenvironment. Again, going back to immune desert versus immune excluded. And we have preserved mitochondrial function and metabolic capacity of the immune system. Where interleukin-15 efficacy is not predictive, it's in the number. Natural killer cell, T lymphocytes, lymphocyte count. It's not predictive. See, when we look at the interleukin-15 efficacy by tumor immunophenotype, when we look at immune desert, there's no immune cells. There's no priming of the immune system. So interleukin-15 is insufficient to elicit any type of anti-tumor immune response. There must be immune priming. This is where engagement with intratumoral ablation, the PEF, and intratumoral immunotherapy, such as CD40 agonists, can engage that priming. That can actually take an immune desert to an immune excluded. In immune excluded tumor, interleukin-15, it has to activate immune cells. But again, remember, immune excluded, the immune cells are at the periphery. They can't get into the parenchyma to engage with the antigens. And so what has to happen is we have to break that up, open it up, get those immune cells out. We have to maintain some sense of vascularity and stromal modulation to ensure the immune system actually gets in, so that the interleukin-15 activates and those then have anti-tumor activity within the tumor and not on the periphery. Again, I think the inflamed, approximately 20 to 25% of tumors, are where interleukin-15 really shines. But I would say if you can couple it with intratumoral ablation and couple it with intratumoral immunotherapy that is further priming the immune system, I think that sequence, that combination, that synergy, Dr. Schoen, I think would have powerful, powerful impact. Because what it would do is not just open up the therapy to efficacy in about 20 to 25% of tumors, the inflamed, at least the way we currently understand them, but it could open it up to 100%. That's what we're about. Building bridges. We build bridges. We synergize ideas and therapies. We help more patients. It's not that this therapy is discovered by them or discovered by them, and so that's their proprietary property, their intellectual. Yes, those things are important when you're talking about business and stuff, but we have too many patients with cancer right now. We need to work together to help patients with cancer. We've got to change how we work on multiple levels. The old process, yeah, it's had its victories. But in this new era of cancer, it's not the right. So the bottom line here, again, simply using interleukin-15 as an example. The efficacy of interleukin-15 based therapies, they cannot be inferred by circulating lymphocyte counts. They cannot. That's not just applying to, again, interleukin-15, but it's all of it. It has to be the immune cell function, activation, priming, localization, spatial relationship. All of this leads to anti-tumor immune competence. Again, the research will all be in the show notes. I encourage you to check that out. So I've been really hitting, lymphocytes. What about natural killer cells? Peripheral abundance versus tumor absence. Again, as I mentioned, 50 to 75%, if not more, of tumor immune microenvironments are suppressive. Transforming growth factor beta, a major player in this. And again, remember the metabolic, when we talk about the Warburg effect, a lot of people talk about that. We can't isolate this. The metabolic effects of the Warburg effect actually affects the immune system and creates in part a lot of this immunosuppressive environment. It creates altered chemokine, cytokine signaling, creates physical barriers, the fibrotic nature of the extracellular matrix, the acid-base balance, the immune barriers, they're all the same. And the hypoxic stress accelerates this process. So natural killer cells can be present in the periphery, and they often are. But if they infiltrate, because they can bypass the barrier, so they're not kept out, but they get in, but they're dysfunctional, they're restrained, they're inhibited, now they're not doing their function. And this is, I think that's an area where interleukin-15 can actually help. Dendritic cells, they launch the immune system. In the inflamed tumors, dendritic cells can be very effective. But again, we fall into that same trap of interleukin-15 of giving things systemic. And that's why I check out the systemic fallacy podcast. because the peripheral presence of dendritic cells versus the tumor function, they don't correlate. Because when you look at dendritic cells within the tumor and the tumor microenvironment, they're often dysfunctional. They're not mature. They're not properly primed. We know this with raising kids, right? We raise our kids and they're not mature. We have to remind them. We have to help them, guide them. Same way, if we have a dendritic cell that engages with the immune system or engages with the tumor and it's immature, we're going to get dysfunction as a part of that. So impaired maturation, blocking antigen presentation, that's what they do. But this is why I don't understand the lymph node extraction removal process, because dendritic cells, let's say they're mature, they're primed, they engage with the inflamed component of a tumor, they see antigens, they're trained and primed via major histocompatibility 1. They then travel to the nearest lymph node to actually engage with lymphocytes, T cells. But yet, what if we've removed that? Where do they go? Maybe they go to a different lymph node, or maybe they go nowhere at all. And so what we've done is disengage the immune system. Vascular endothelial growth factor, interleukin 10, transforming growth factor beta play a critical role here in dendritic cell priming, dysfunction, immaturity. CD8 cells, blood versus tumor. Again, it's the same parameters here. The chemokine signaling, the cytokine signaling, the abnormal vasculature, the barriers, whether it's the extracellular matrix, whether it's immune barriers, the acid-base barriers, the checkpoint inhibiting, all of these are creating the discordance between the blood and the tumor. The key is, do the immune cells in the periphery, can they engage, and the signaling that is too, can they engage in the tumor? Because that's where it's at. That's where the game's at. You know, I played offensive line center. Quarterback's great. You know, he gets all the accolades, right? It's typically the Hollywood guy. I don't know, you know, if you look at some of the older quarterbacks, they were not Hollywood-esque. They weren't very good looking. Nowadays, they seem to be much more good looking guys. But if the offensive line doesn't block, doesn't work together in cohesiveness, is not on the same playing field, on the same alignment of play call, blocking assignment, that star, that Hollywood star, he gets crushed. But it's that context of them working together, the spatial relationship on the same synergistic playing field, signaling, that allows a quarterback to throw the touchdown, score the touchdown, win the game. Of course, he gets all the accolades. But the point is, it's all of them working together that create the environment that allows the immune system to infiltrate, activate, engage, and create a local immune reaction and a systemic immune reaction. When introduced, Immunoscore concept was actually introduced in 2018 by the Jerome Gallone's group. I know this is going a little bit long, but bear with me. I'm about to wrap this up. They were here looking at biomarkers, moving beyond the conventional staging to evaluate the immune landscape directly within the tumor to provide the score here and staging. And what they did is they looked at intratumoral evaluation of CD3 and CD8 T cell infiltration within the tumor immune microenvironment, within the tissue. And they found that this was more representative than relying on peripheral levels. It showed superior prognostic power of the ability to target the tumor because the immune system is there. The key insight, tumor immune infiltration is significantly more prognostic than systemic immune measurements. Highlights the importance of not just tumor immune competence, but tumor immune microenvironment competence. Why does this matter clinically? Intratumoral immunotherapy, intratumoral ablation, tumor microenvironment remodeling, of course, in part with ablation, stromal targeting, vascularity normalization, and then local cytokine, chemokine delivery that's anti-tumor, not pro-tumor. The key insight here is that the overarching goal here is to bridge the fundamental gap between systemic immunity and effective local anti-tumor immunity. Again, bridging gaps. The bottom line when we look at peripheral versus tumor immunity, peripheral immune cells, they don't reflect immune status inside the tumor. Sometimes it's what we got, but they don't. They don't reflect normal differentiating or normal dendritic cells in the periphery of what's in the tumor. Natural killer cell, what's in the periphery, what's in the tumor, or lymphocytes, what's in the periphery and what's in the tumor. A healthy systemic immune system coupled with immune desert or immune excluded tumor microenvironment, this is one of the central challenges of modern cancer immunotherapy. We have to work the problem because patients demand it, and we should demand it for ourselves. So the cancer truth here is cancer emerges from network failures, not single targeted number defects. Aristotle has been credited with saying the body is greater than the sum of the individual parts. So if we break things down to understand them, we must reassemble those compartments in the context of the whole in which they exist and the context of the whole of helping the patient. So the myth, immunotherapy failure means immunotherapy doesn't work. And you hear that all the time. Well, you don't have this, you don't have this marker, so it's not going to work. You've tried it and it didn't work, so it's not going to work now. The truth, if immunotherapy failed, it failed because of the immune ecosystem within the tumor microenvironment. Change that immune ecosystem, you change the immunotherapy response. Thank you for joining me on this 4-part series of 7, the 4th part of the 7th series on cancer myths versus cancer truth. Really encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. Drop us a 5-star review if we may so kindly ask. And also like this episode and share it with others that you think would benefit from this, because the more we work together, the more bridges we build, the more patients we help, and the quicker we get to that goal that we're all after, and that is healing, cure for every patient, no matter the name of the disease, no matter the stage, no matter the age. I'm Dr. Goodyear, and this is the Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear podcast. I'll see you on the next podcast.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribed Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribed.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.